Chapter 1. The Roots of Devotion. Arjun stood by the window of his office, staring out into the busy city streets below, his mind far away from the spreadsheets and reports cluttering his desk. He was thinking about his mother, Leela, and the life they had shared. His father had passed away when Arjun was only 10 years old, leaving behind a family with few resources and a mountain of challenges. Leela, barely in her 30s at the time, had been forced to find work to support her son. She took on multiple jobs, cooking, cleaning, and sewing, working until her hands were raw and her body worn, but she never once complained. All her energy and focus had been on one thing, ensuring that Arjun had a better life than the one she had struggled through. Arjun had grown up watching his mother sacrifice her own dreams and desires for him. She hadn't remarried, choosing instead to pour every bit of her energy into raising him. He remembered nights when she would stay up late, sewing clothes to sell while he slept, unaware of her exhaustion. She had taught him everything: how to be strong, how to persevere, how to stand tall even when life knocked you down. As a child, he had promised himself that one day, when he became successful, he would take care of her, just as she had taken care of him. She deserved to rest, to enjoy life without the constant worry of bills or burdens. She had given him everything, and now it was his turn to repay her in every way possible. But now, as a man, Arjun faced a new reality. He was married, and that bond brought with it new responsibilities, new promises. And though he had tried to prepare for it, nothing could have made him understand how deeply divided his heart would become between his mother and his wife. Chapter 2. Love Blossoms. Arjun met Priya at a conference abroad, and from the moment he saw her, he was drawn to her. Priya had a strength that he admired, a quiet but firm independence. She was smart, ambitious, and yet gentle in her mannerisms. They had spent hours talking during that conference, discussing everything from work to family, from dreams to fears. Arjun had never felt such a connection with anyone before. After several months of long-distance communication, Arjun and Priya decided to marry. Priya was everything he had wanted in a partner, someone who could stand beside him as an equal, someone who could share his life, his joys, and his sorrows. When they married, Arjun felt his life was complete. He had his mother, who had been his foundation, and now he had Priya, the woman with whom he could build his future. He believed that love would be enough to bring harmony into their home, that Priya would find her place alongside his mother, and that together they would form one family. In the beginning, things were good. Priya made efforts to adjust to living in Arjun's family home with his mother, understanding the importance of tradition and respect. Leela, too, welcomed Priya with open arms, treating her like the daughter she never had. But soon small cracks began to appear. Priya, coming from a more modern background, wanted to manage the household differently. She wasn't used to the strict routines or the old-fashioned methods of running a home. On the other hand, Leela had spent decades managing everything her way. And though she had no ill intentions, she couldn't help but correct Priya whenever she did something that clashed with how things had always been done. Chapter 3. A Growing Divide. As time passed, the small, seemingly insignificant differences grew into bigger issues. It started with simple things: how the kitchen should be arranged, how meals should be cooked, how festivals should be celebrated. Priya, wanting to make her own mark, started changing small aspects of the home, adding her own touch to the decor, trying new recipes, and suggesting new ways to celebrate family traditions. Leela, though she never said it outright, felt threatened. This was her home, her sanctuary. For years she had been the one in charge, the one who decided how things should be done. Even though she loved Priya, she found it hard to let go of the control she had always had over the household. Every time Priya made a change, Leela felt as though a small piece of her own identity was being erased. The tension simmered under the surface for months. Arjun noticed the small, tight-lipped exchanges between his mother and his wife, the subtle sighs of frustration when one woman's way of doing something was contradicted by the other. But he convinced himself that these were just growing pains, that they would eventually settle into a rhythm. He loved them both so much. Surely they could find a way to coexist. But then, one evening, the tension boiled over. Priya was cooking dinner, and Leela was sitting at the dining table watching her. Priya had decided to experiment with a new recipe she had found online, something different from the traditional dishes they usually ate. As she added spices, Leela's eyes narrowed. "You're putting too much chili," Leela said, her voice edged with concern. "Arjun doesn't like it too spicy." Priya, trying to keep her tone light, replied, "Don't worry, Ma. Arjun told me he likes it a bit spicier these days." Leela frowned. "That's not how I've made it for years. I know what he likes." The words stung Priya. She felt like every little decision she made was being questioned. "Ma, I understand how you've done things, but can't I try something different? Arjun and I enjoy trying new things together." Leela's voice grew firmer. "This is our home. Things have always been done a certain way for a reason. You should respect that." The argument that followed was louder and more painful than any before. Both women felt hurt. Priya because she felt her independence and efforts to contribute were being stifled, and Leela because she felt like she was losing control of the home she had built. Arjun, walking in from the living room, stood frozen in the doorway, hearing the sharp exchange between his mother and wife. His heart ached as the two women he loved the most seemed to be tearing each other apart. Chapter 4. The Weight of Responsibility. That night, after the argument had subsided and the house fell into an uncomfortable silence, Arjun lay awake in bed. Priya was beside him, her back turned, her breathing shallow with the weight of unspoken words. His mother, Leela, was likely in her own room, feeling hurt and confused, just as Priya did. Arjun felt like he was drowning. He had always believed he could keep his mother and wife happy, that they would naturally find harmony. But now he was beginning to realize that it wasn't that simple. He was caught in the middle, and no matter which way he turned, he felt like he was letting someone down. The next morning, Arjun went to his mother's room. Leela was sitting by the window, her hands resting in her lap, her face drawn with the quiet sadness of last night's argument. She didn't look at him as he entered. "Ma," Arjun began softly, sitting beside her. "I know things have been difficult lately." Leela sighed, finally turning to face him. "Arjun, I don't want to cause problems between you and Priya, but I've lived my whole life in this house, and now everything feels like it's changing." Arjun took a deep breath. "I understand, Ma. But you have to understand that Priya is my wife. She's trying to create a home for us, just like you did for me and Dad all those years ago." Leela was silent for a long moment, and then she nodded, her eyes misty with unshed tears. "I'll try, Arjun. For you, I'll try." Later that day, Arjun found Priya in the kitchen preparing lunch. She looked up as he entered, her eyes tired and sad. Without saying a word, Arjun walked over to her, gently taking her hand. "Priya," he said softly, "I know things have been hard. I know you're trying your best, and I appreciate everything you do." Priya looked at him, her eyes welling up with emotion. "Arjun, I love you, but it's so hard to feel like I'm constantly being second-guessed, like nothing I do is good enough." "I know," Arjun said, his voice filled with understanding. "But Ma isn't trying to push you away. She's just used to being in control of everything. It's hard for her to let go." Priya sighed. "I don't want to take anything away from her. But I need to have my own voice in this home too." Chapter 5. The Delicate Balance. "I've spoken to her," Arjun repeated softly, "and she's going to try to give us more space. She knows how much you mean to me, Priya, but I need you to be patient with her too. She's spent her whole life taking care of me, and now she feels like she's losing that role." Priya's eyes softened, though the strain was still visible on her face. "I understand that, Arjun, I really do. But I didn't expect to feel like an outsider in my own home. I don't want to be in constant conflict with her. But it's hard when every decision I make seems to create tension." Arjun squeezed her hand, his heart heavy with the weight of his divided loyalty. "We'll figure it out. I don't want to choose between you and Ma, Priya. I need you both in my life. But the only way we can move forward is by finding a balance together." For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence thick with unresolved emotions. Arjun could feel the enormity of the task ahead of him. His love for his mother and his devotion to Priya pulled him in different directions, but he knew that, for his marriage to thrive, he had to establish clear boundaries. This was his responsibility, not just as a son but as a husband. Priya rested her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in days, the tension between them eased. "I love you, Arjun," she whispered. "And I want this to work. But it has to be our home, not just your mother's." Arjun nodded. "I promise, Priya. It will be." That night, for the first time in what felt like weeks, there was peace at the dinner table. The atmosphere was not perfect, but it was quieter, calmer. Leela kept her distance, allowing Priya to serve the meal the way she liked, and Priya, in turn, made sure to include one of Leela's favorite dishes, a gesture of goodwill that did not go unnoticed. Arjun watched the exchange silently, his heart swelling with cautious hope. He knew that this fragile truce would take time to nurture, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. Chapter 6. The Unspoken Struggles. Weeks passed, and although the surface tension between Leela and Priya had eased, the underlying discomfort still lingered. The two women were trying, but it was clear that the wounds of their past conflicts were not easily forgotten. Arjun could sense the hesitation in Priya's actions, the way she would glance at Leela for approval before making a decision. And he could see the way Leela held herself back, her sharp comments now replaced by quiet restraint. One evening, as Arjun returned home late from work, he found his mother sitting alone in the living room, staring at an old family photo. She was lost in thought, her eyes filled with a sadness that tugged at Arjun's heart. "Ma?" he called gently, sitting down beside her. Leela didn't look at him, her gaze still fixed on the photo. "You were such a happy child," she said softly. "We were happy, even when things were hard." Arjun's heart clenched at her words. "We were, Ma, and we still are, but things change, don't they?" Leela sighed, finally turning to him. "Yes, they do. But it's hard for me, Arjun. I know I need to let go, but I feel like I'm losing you. You're building a new life with Priya, and I feel like I'm being pushed out." Arjun reached for her hand, his voice gentle but firm. "You're not losing me, Ma, you never will. But you have to understand that Priya is my wife. I have to build a life with her too, just like you and Dad did." Leela's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "I know, Arjun, but I've spent so many years taking care of you. It's hard to step back now to let someone else take over." Arjun squeezed her hand. "You'll always be a part of my life, Ma. That will never change. But I need you to trust Priya. She's trying her best, just like you did." Leela smiled faintly, though the sadness in her eyes remained. "I'll try, Arjun. For you, I'll try." The conversation weighed heavily on Arjun as he made his way to his bedroom where Priya was waiting for him. She was already in bed, reading a book, but she put it down as he entered, her eyes searching his face for signs of the burden he carried. "You spoke to her?" Priya asked quietly. Arjun nodded. "Yeah, she's struggling, Priya. It's not that she doesn't like you. She's just finding it hard to let go of her role in my life." Priya sighed, her frustration evident. "I get that, Arjun, but it feels like I'm always walking on eggshells, trying not to upset her. It's exhausting." "I know," Arjun said, sitting down beside her. "And I'm sorry. I never wanted you to feel like this. But I need you to trust me. I'm doing everything I can to make this work." Priya leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I do trust you. But sometimes I wonder if things will ever really change." "They will," Arjun promised, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince Priya or himself. "They have to." Chapter 7. Breaking Point. Despite Arjun's best efforts to mediate between the two women in his life, the underlying tensions continued to simmer. It seemed that every time they took a step forward, something small would drag them 2 steps back. It was during the festival of Diwali that things finally came to a head. Diwali had always been a big celebration in Arjun's family. Leela took great pride in organizing the festival, decorating the house, preparing traditional sweets, and leading the family in prayers. It was a tradition that Arjun cherished, one that he had always looked forward to with excitement. But this year, Priya wanted to add her own touch to the celebrations. She had grown up celebrating Diwali differently, with more modern interpretations of the festival. She suggested using eco-friendly decorations, trying new sweets, and incorporating a few ideas from her own childhood. Leela, of course, was resistant to change. "We've always done things a certain way," she said sharply when Priya brought up her ideas. "This is how my mother did it, and how her mother before her did it. These traditions mean something." Priya, already tired from weeks of trying to please Leela, couldn't hold back her frustration any longer. "I understand that these traditions are important to you, Ma, but I want to create something new for Arjun and me. We can honor the past, but we don't have to be stuck in it." The argument escalated quickly, both women speaking over each other, their voices growing louder and more heated with each passing moment. Arjun, who had been in the next room, rushed in to find the two women standing face to face, their emotions raw and exposed. "Enough!" Arjun shouted, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Both Leela and Priya turned to look at him, their faces flushed with anger and hurt. Arjun felt his heart break as he realized just how deep the divide had become. "This is not what I wanted," Arjun said, his voice shaking with emotion. "I love both of you, but this fighting has to stop. We're a family, and we need to find a way to live together." Leela opened her mouth to speak, but Arjun held up his hand. "Ma, I know you've always done things a certain way, and I respect that. But Priya is my wife, and she has the right to create new traditions with me. We can't keep living in the past." He turned to Priya, his eyes filled with pain. "And Priya, I understand that you want to make this house your own, but you need to show some patience with Ma. She's not trying to take over. She's just struggling to adjust." Both women stood in silence, their anger momentarily overshadowed by the weight of Arjun's words. He had never spoken so forcefully before, never laid out his feelings so clearly. "We have to make this work," Arjun continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I can't keep living like this, torn between the two people I love the most. We either figure this out together, or we're going to fall apart." Chapter 8: Rebuilding Trust. The days that followed were quiet, but there was a noticeable shift in the household. Priya and Leela, both shaken by Arjun's outburst, began to make a conscious effort to rebuild their relationship. Leela started to let Priya take more control over the household, stepping back from her usual role and allowing Priya to make decisions. It wasn't easy for her, but she did it for Arjun. She began to see Priya not as a rival, but as someone who also loved her son deeply. Priya, in turn, made an effort to involve Leela in decisions, consulting her on important matters and showing appreciation for her wisdom. She began to realize that Leela wasn't trying to undermine her, but was simply clinging to the life she had known for so long. Over time, small gestures of goodwill began to heal the rift between Priya and Leela. Priya would ask Leela for advice on how to prepare certain traditional dishes, and Leela, rather than being critical, found joy in passing down recipes that had been in the family for generations. Priya no longer saw these moments as a threat to her independence, but as an opportunity to connect with her mother-in-law in a meaningful way. Leela, too, began to appreciate Priya's modern ideas and openness to change. When Priya suggested eco-friendly Diwali decorations again the following year, Leela, instead of protesting, embraced the idea. The house was a blend of old and new, a mix of Leela's cherished traditions and Priya's modern touches. For the first time, the festival felt like a true celebration of family, with everyone contributing something special. Arjun watched these changes with quiet relief. The home, once filled with tension, was now a space of mutual respect. He no longer felt like he was walking on eggshells, trying to keep peace between his mother and his wife. They were working together, not just tolerating each other, but learning from one another. Still, the journey wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when old habits resurfaced and misunderstandings arose. But what changed was how those conflicts were handled. Instead of letting things fester, Priya and Leela began to communicate more openly, expressing their frustrations calmly rather than letting resentment build. Arjun, in turn, made a conscious effort to support both women in their roles. He spent time with his mother, showing her that she was still an important part of his life, while also nurturing his relationship with Priya, ensuring that their marriage remained strong and balanced. He had learned that being a husband and a son didn't have to be a choice between two loves. It was about finding harmony between them. Chapter 9. New Beginnings. As the years passed, the family found its rhythm. Priya and Leela developed a bond that was uniquely theirs, one built on shared experiences and mutual respect. They were different women, but they had found common ground in their love for Arjun and their desire to create a happy home. Then came news that changed everything once again. Priya was pregnant. The announcement brought both joy and anxiety into the household. For Arjun, it was a moment of overwhelming happiness, the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. But for Priya, the excitement was mixed with uncertainty. Would she and Leela be able to navigate this new phase of their relationship without falling back into old patterns? Leela, on the other hand, was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandmother, but she also knew that her role would have to change once again. This time, she vowed to approach the situation with more understanding, offering her support without overstepping her boundaries. As the months went by, Leela and Priya worked together to prepare for the baby's arrival. They went shopping for baby clothes, debated over the best nursery designs, and discussed child-rearing philosophies. Priya, now more confident in her role as a wife and soon-to-be mother, was able to express her desires without feeling overshadowed, and Leela respected her wishes, offering advice only when asked. On the day the baby was born, a beautiful baby girl, the house was filled with an outpouring of love and joy. As Arjun held his daughter in his arms for the first time, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was the family he had always dreamed of, and though the path had been difficult, they had made it through stronger than ever. Leela, standing beside Arjun and Priya in the hospital room, couldn't hold back her tears. She gazed at her granddaughter with a sense of awe and gratitude. Priya, now a mother herself, looked at Leela with newfound understanding. The sacrifices, the fears, the struggles, it all made sense now in a way it hadn't before. In that moment, Priya reached out and took Leela's hand. No words were exchanged, but the gesture said everything. They were not just mother-in-law and daughter-in-law anymore. They were family, bound together not just by Arjun, but by the shared love for the new life they had brought into the world.